So you can get an idea then of who John Combs was, a pillar in this church, in this community. Between 1,500 and 2,000 people came through here to greet the family and to pay homage to John. And one of the biggest funerals that I've ever seen. And the question is, who's going to take his place? We compared John yesterday to Elijah. If you don't know about Elijah, Elijah was a prophet of God in the Old Testament. And so you have the establishment of the kingdom of Israel, and it's led by a group of judges over time, and then the people want a king, and so they have Solomon, and then the true king after Solomon is really David, and this kingdom's established, and then all these kings come in his line, and they're not all very good. Matter of fact, one of them's name is Ahab, and he was really terrible. And so God sends Elijah, the prophet. The first time we see him is in the book of 1 Kings. And in 1 Kings chapter 17, Elijah the prophet, he's called Elijah the Tishbite. I don't know what a Tishbite is. Nobody knows what a Tishbite really is. But he was one. And he comes and he shows up and he confronts the king. And he does it boldly. And apparently he's got some sort of dynamic power and position and recognition that the king doesn't do anything about it. And so he has this weight of God, the authority of God upon him. And so he goes throughout the rest of the book of Kings, 1 Kings, and then in the beginning of 2 Kings, he's called home. And he doesn't die. As a matter of fact, we only see this a couple times in the Bible. We see that God sends these chariots of fire. Before there was ever a movie of Chariots of Fire, he was the original Chariots of Fire. And here comes these chariots and horses of fire and pull him up, and he leaves this earth alive. How awesome is that? I'd kind of like to go that way, wouldn't you? That whole death thing, I'd just like to skip that. And so he was a dynamic man, a man that was truly loved by God, and a man that God honored in receiving him home this way. And we talked about John yesterday and said John was a man a lot like Elijah. He was involved in politics and trying to make his community better. He was a man who was discipling and again, pouring himself into other people. And he was a man who's deeply concerned about the kingdom of God and the things of God. And so we talked about him being like Elijah also in the fact that he went out in a blaze of glory. Dillard pointed out that John was Elder of the Month for February. That he was leading our 175th anniversary celebration. 20 teams he's got in place for that event that's going to happen in October. He and his wife are still leading the Challenger class, which is our largest Sunday school class. They're still leading the Go-Getters ministry. And the list goes on and on and on of the things that he was doing. And so he didn't have to fade away. John went out truly in a blaze of glory. And again, the question is, who's going to take his place? And so we see in 1 Kings, I told you that Elijah shows up in chapter 17, but interestingly, in chapter 19, just 2 chapters later, somebody else shows up. And so let's just talk here about the call of somebody to take his place. So 1 Kings chapter 19, verse 16. Also, you shall, this is God speaking, also you shall anoint Jehu, the son of Nimshi, as king over Israel, and Elisha, the son of Shaphat of Abel, Meholah, you shall anoint as prophet in your place. Now this is a long time before he was to be called home to be with God, and yet he is supposed to anoint somebody to take his place. Now, this is Elijah. Don't get these two guys confused. Elijah was to anoint a man named Elisha. Everybody say Elijah. And say Elisha. All right, now wipe the spit off the person in front of you from doing that. And so here is God's command, just two chapters after we see Elijah come on the scene, for him to anoint his replacement. Now, that doesn't sound too exciting, does it? How many of you at work would be really excited if the boss says, listen, I want you to start training your replacement? As a matter of fact, can you imagine just being a year or two into your job and you've reached your career and you're going and somebody comes up to Nathan and says, Nathan, you say, yes, Mr. Bridgestone, I'd like for you to start training your replacement. And of course, immediately he's thinking about, how am I going to feed my family? He's going to be kicking me out. But Elijah did not hesitate. He did exactly what God had asked him to do. You see, here it's extremely important to understand that Elijah understood what God's plan is. As a matter of fact, we see this in the New Testament with Paul, the great apostle Paul, who has gone to all the world. He knows that he's not going to be here forever. And he starts to train up people to take his place. One of those was Timothy, good name. Another was Titus. And we see that he is training up people who will take his place. Daniel and I think it was appropriate, we went to a conference. I wasn't really sure what they were going to talk about. It was a leadership conference. You know what they were talking about? Training pastors, training up other pastors to take their place. And I'm looking over at Daniel and said, don't get any ideas, buddy. But honestly, we've been working together for 5 years now. By the way, let me just say this. Yesterday, as we were up here ministering to John's family and all the people that came, I just got to say, Kenny has worked overtime getting this church ready. He and his family worked overtime and all the different things that have been going on here. Our fellowship ministry has prepared and served I don't know how much food. Rodney, there was plenty of food, wasn't there? Did you get any of that Jell-O salad that Judy Pratt made? That stuff is unbelievable. It's better than Thin Mints. And yesterday, on their 51st anniversary, Don and Evelyn were up here serving like they always do. And there was a young man who turned 30 yesterday who was up here serving. That's Daniel, who spent all kinds of time preparing and helping to make sure everything was ready for the family. And so we've been able to work together 5 years now. Happy 30th anniversary. I look a lot better than you at 30. And we have been, when we hired Daniel, our elders said it's our responsibility to help him to become the best that he can. And we're going to get everything out of him that we can for the good of this church, but we're going to pour everything that we can into him for the good of the kingdom. And that is actually what we're all about. And so we see there's mentoring, there's training. We call this in Christian world discipleship. In Star Wars, it would be like having a Padawan learner. Y'all don't know what that is. And one of the things that we love and we celebrate here at this church is intergenerational relationships. And boy, I'm going to tell you that makes us better. I don't know about you, but I love Arthur Irvin, don't you? And I got so excited when our kids got to sit with Arthur Irvin and learn how to do crafts and woodworking. And I love it right now when they're working with different people in our church who are teaching them how to raise a garden. And we see this beautiful intergenerational activity. I'm going to tell you, on the surface, it doesn't look too spiritual. There's not a whole lot of Bible study going on. They don't do a ton of praying, but I'll tell you what is going on. Younger people are looking at older people and knowing that they're loved and they're seeing their example. And now when somebody like John Combs goes on to be with the Lord, my daughter cries because she loves him. And that's just a weird relationship, isn't it? A 17-year-old girl and a 70-some-year-old man who have created relationships. Why? Because here we pour into one another. And we gather together as people of all ages. I was on the phone with somebody who was asking about our church just yesterday. And I said, you might not like our church. I know what you're thinking. Brother Tim, we need people to come to our church. I'm just being honest. I said a few years ago, the people in our church who were the older people of our church said, we want to be a church where the younger people can come. And so we don't sing as much as Just a Closer Walk with Thee as we used to. We sing some other songs. We do things a little different, and our worship is a little less formal. But it was that generation that said, we want to be a place where the next generation will come and feel a part. And so this is what God is doing here in 1 Kings 19:19. He is issuing a call. He is telling him, go and train your replacement. And listen to me. He's saying that to us today. And so in 1 Kings 19:19, we see what he did. And so he departed from there, and he found Elisha, the son of Shaphat, who was plowing with 12 yoke of oxen before him. And he was with the 12. Then Elijah passed by him and threw his mantle on him. This mantle was a thing that he wore, kind of like a scarf around his neck. It was really the thing that would keep him warm. And that had some sort of significance as recognizing authority. And so when he takes his mantle, his authority, he places it upon Elisha. And Elisha's just here in the field plowing, and he's probably thinking, what are you doing? Why are you placing this upon me? But he didn't ask any questions. He just did what he was supposed to do. He knew that Elijah was placing upon him his mantle, his responsibility, his position. And so the question is, where is the next Elisha? Where is the next John Combs? Where is the next Arthur Irvin? Where's the next Judy Pratt? Where's the next Martha Hager? The next leaders, the next elders? Where are the next people that will go out and find heathen like Jim Klein and take him fishing and take him to dinner and invest in his life and say, I want you to come to a church with me, brother? Where is that? Just a show of hands, how many of you here today, partially or totally because John Combs invited you? Go ahead and raise your hands. Look at that. Look around the room. Where's the next guy that will do that? When I talked to my father, I said, John Combs is sick in the hospital. He said, oh, no. I love that guy. Dad hadn't met John but maybe 5 or 6 times. But he felt like the rest of us. That's my best friend. And John today would have been back there. He would never wear a tie. He'd just wear a polo shirt. He'd have a jacket on. And he'd greet everybody that came in by name. Where's the next person who will do that? Where's the next person who will sacrificially give so that this ministry may move on for the next generation? Where's the next person who will give up their time and their talents and their energy? Where's the next person who will pour into people who will come after? Where's the next person who will love people unconditionally and sow the very grace that Jim was talking about, the very grace that he received? Where's the next person who will demonstrate the love of Jesus Christ because he had received the love of Jesus Christ? I had one lady that says, since I was sick, which has been several years now, John's called me every day to ask me how I'm doing. Other people said he never forgot a birthday. Where are the next people who will do that? Where is Elisha? Who will be Elisha? And so we have the call that goes forward, but I want you to know today, if you are going to be Elisha, there is a cost. And let's talk about the cost of it. The cost, well, let's just look at what Elisha's was. Look at 1 Kings chapter 19, verse 21. Elisha turned back from him. This is after the mantle was placed on him. And he took a yoke of oxen. Now, a yoke of oxen in that day represented, how many of you can imagine a giant John Deere tractor that costs about $100,000? All right? Or a semi-tractor that you earn your living at. He took his tractor and trailer. He took his John Deere, and here's what he did. He killed them. It says he slaughtered them, and he boiled their flesh, and he used the oxen's equipment, gave it to the people, and they ate. And so here's what he did. He had a barbecue. Maybe it's like a fish fry. And he took this meat, and he took all the equipment, and he took all that he had, and he said, I give this up for the call of God in my life. He was willing to leave behind the things that he had worked so hard to gain. The things today that would represent our college degree, our pinnacle of our career, the very thing that brings us wealth and recognition. He was willing to leave them behind, and he utterly and completely left them behind. He never went back. Jesus tells us, he says, unless you're willing to leave your father and mother and all these other things behind, you're not worthy. Now, he's not literally telling us you've got to leave your father and mother behind, but he's saying you've got to be willing if you're going to be like Elisha. You got to be willing if you're going to be like Paul. You got to be willing if you're going to be like Timothy. You got to be willing if you're going to be like John Combs to give up some things. You and I today need to understand that we live in a culture where it's hard to give things up. Because this world says, gain all you can have. Bring it all in. Be selfish. It's all about you. If you give out your time, only give out only as little as you want. And just enough to make you feel good about yourself and then move on. If you were here yesterday, you heard Megan wrote a letter to her grandfather. and to us. And in that letter, she said, my grandfather gave me the best advice I've ever had in my life. She said, Grandpa told me, PJ told me, that if you would be selfless, if you would give of yourself, that you would be happy. My friends, that is tremendous advice right there. I don't know that I've never known a man any more satisfied than John Combs. And yet I don't know of a man who ever gave any more to his community, to his family, to his heathen fishing buddies, and to his church than John Combs did. I don't know where he found the time. I don't know where he found the energy, especially in these last few months as half of his heart literally didn't work. He was still here for every meeting. He was still leading 20 teams. He was still going with the go-getters. He was at every Christmas party. He was giving, loving, serving, right up until he went out in a blaze of glory. I'm going to tell you something today. For those of you who would be Elisha, it's going to cost you something. But listen to me, friends. It is absolutely worth it. You want a fulfilled life, don't live for yourself. Live for God and live for others. Be like Elisha. He was willing to give it all up. He was willing to follow after Elijah, and that was no fun life. They didn't travel like the Duns in a nice motor home. They walked everywhere they went, and they walked all over the place, and it was hard. They were threatened by the kings. They were maligned by people who were in sin. They lived from whatever it was they were able to gather together. There were times when they were absolutely starved, and they would go to somebody who was starving. As a matter of fact, Elijah went to somebody who was starving and said, please make me a sandwich. Give me a sandwich, man. I need a sandwich. She said, I don't have anything. I'm just saving this for our last meal. He said, you give me the sandwich. And you see what happened. It wasn't literally a sandwich. They didn't have him yet. Earl's sandwich had not been born yet. But the point is, she gave him some food because he didn't have anything. And God miraculously multiplied everything that she had, and she never ran out again. But that's the point. It was not easy. If you're going to be what John Combs was to this church, if you're going to be what Elisha was to Israel, it's going to cost you something. But I'm going to say it again. I'm going to say it again. I don't want you to miss this. It'll be worth it. I promise you, it'll be worth it. And so we see that there was a call and there was a cost. But in 2 Kings chapter 2, as we go into a new book of the Bible, we see something really interesting happen. We see that all of a sudden, Elijah, though he's healthy, Elijah, though he's at the peak of his career, Elijah, though things are going well, Elijah's going to get to go home. And the prophets come to Elisha and say, don't you know your master is going to be gone here soon? Elisha says, I know. And so Elijah says to Elisha, hey, you stay here. I've got to go somewhere. By the way, you talk about a cost. How would you like to have to work on training a guy? That's not always easy, is it? And Elijah sometimes probably said, I'm kind of tired of this. Let me just go be off by myself. How many of you know that it's easier to do it by yourself? Evan, it's almost easier to do it by yourself than to train other people to do it, isn't it? There's a cost. And so Elijah is going to be called home. And he says to Elisha, you stay here. I love what Elisha said. No way, Jose. That's the new Tim Stutler version. He said, no, I'm going with you. Wherever you go, I'm going to go. And so here's what happens. Elijah takes his mantle off and he strikes the river and the river parts. Cool trick, huh? And they walk across. And they go, and there's 50 prophets who watched them go off in the distance. And again he says to Elisha, stay here, I'm going to go. And Elisha said, no way, Jose, I'm going with you. And so all of a sudden, here's what happens. They're walking, and they're talking, much like 2 Tuesdays ago, as we were with John. They're walking, and they're talking, and look what happens in verse 12. There is a chariot of fire, and these horses of fire that come, and they draw Elijah. And it says here, Elisha saw it, and he cried out, my father, the chariot of Israel and its horsemen. So he saw him no more. Then he took hold of his clothes, and he tore them in 2 pieces. This is a sign of sadness. Rodney, we know sadness, don't we? We all have experienced this. We've experienced it this week, certainly. My father. So he witnessed this homegoing. But let me just tell you, the work of God never skipped a beat. Look with me. 2 Kings 2:14. Then he took the mantle of Elijah that had fallen from him, and he struck the water, and said, "Where is the Lord God of Elijah?" And when he had struck the water, you know what happened? The water parted. And all those prophets knew immediately that God was continuing his work. Now, let me remind you. Before Elijah left, he said, "Elisha, is there anything I can do for you before I go?" And you know what Elisha said? "I want twice as what you got from God. I want a double portion." How many of you have heard that before? Elisha says, "I want a double portion." Boy, that's like me with Thin Mints. I want a double portion. And Elijah says, "Well, if you witness me, go, you'll get it." And here we see that Elisha not only takes Elijah's place, but in terms of miracles, in terms of ministry, he went far beyond what his predecessor had done. That's how God works. I was at a funeral last week up in Kentucky. And I have a pastor friend who's up there, and he's young in the ministry. He's about my age, maybe a little younger, but he's new in the ministry. And he pulled me aside there, and he said, "Listen, let me ask you something. How did you balance the ministry and your family?" And I said, "I didn't." He looked at me. "I knew you were a heathen." And I said, "Here's what I did." I said, I did the ministry with my family. He said, "What do you mean?" I said, "When I went to the funerals, my children came with me. They were up at the church all the time. They were there helping me. When we did VBS, my kids dressed up in character. And they helped us lead Vacation Bible School. When we went somewhere to minister, they went with us to these revival services. That's where they learned to love potlucks." And today, Ken is taking a class at Anderson University called Practice of Ministry. Is that what it's called? Pastoral Ministry. And he could almost teach the class because he's grown up doing it. My daughter Hannah's been with us on 2 mission trips. She's been with us in all these things at church, and you can see her today. They're taking the place. You know what they are? They're the 5th generation of people who've grown up serving the Lord. Will you do that to your children? Will you train them and teach them? Will you be Elijahs to the next generation? Evelyn, will you find somebody to pour into? Because someday the Lord's going to call you up in a chariot. And we've got to have good food. Amen? Bill, will you pour into people who take your place? You're an extraordinary elder. And the thoughts of losing you someday are not very appealing to me. Will you pour into somebody? And will you help them become everything that you are and more? Nathan, you're a new elder. Will you be an Elisha? Will you step into those roles? And let them mentor you. Let them teach you. And will you follow after them? And be there with them, just like we were yesterday, to say goodbye as God calls them home. Will we do that? I'm going to just stop with this. And say from the bottom of my heart, when a church loses somebody like John Combs, when they lose people like Joe Hay, when these kind of people go on to be with the Lord, it leaves a huge hole. But listen to me, Jim. God's plan is to have the guy ready to take the mantle and strike the water immediately after. All we have to do is be willing to receive that mantle, count the cost, and take their shoes. And we need that. We need that. And so will you step up? Will you be Elisha in your giving, in your prayers, in loving people, and serving, and leading, and sacrificing, and giving vision, inviting people, and ministering people? Will you be the next John Combs?